wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show, and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm Jonathan Green.
And I'm James Carberry.
Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. This episode is sponsored by Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. We are here today with Shannon Miles. She is the co-founder and CEO at BELAY. She's also the author of the new book, The Third Option. Shannon, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic.
I am excited to chat with you today, Shannon. We're going to be talking a lot about remote work and a lot of the mistakes that you see folks making when it comes to remote work. But before we dive into that, I'd love for you to first tell us a little bit about BELAY and what you guys are up to over there.
Yeah, BELAY is a virtual services company. So before we dive into the topic of working remote, like our whole company is built on the premise that you could be super effective and work from home. But we source virtual assistants, bookkeepers, writers, and webmasters to growing organizations.
I love it. And so I mentioned it very briefly in the intro, but you've got a book that recently released called The Third Option. I would imagine, it's related to working remote, but can you elaborate a little bit more on what the book is about?
Yeah, it came out in April, and the premise is for a long time we've been presented with two obvious options for working. Either you work full time outside of the home with a commute in an office, or you don't work for whatever reason, whether you're, raising your family or taking care of aging parents or whatever. But the third option is all about the fact that there are a lot more options out there than those two. And so it's my journey of when I had my daughter, crafting this part-time work from home position in my traditional corporate setting that worked for me. And it's such a hot topic right now with so many women primarily having to choose between work and family. But even more so now, some of the millennial men are rethinking what their lives need to look like and figuring out what their third option is. So that's the premise of the book. It's it's a lot of stories, but it's also practical, how to figure out if you're ready, for a third option or if it's right for you. And then if you do decide to go on that journey, how to make it work for the long term.
I love it. And folks can find that on Amazon, I would imagine, is the primary way that folks can find it.
Yep, they can find it on Amazon. We also have a site for the book. It's mythirdoption.com, and there are some resources there that can help, as well as a repository for stories, which I think is super cool, because what my third option looks like is different than yours and is different than the next person. So it can kind of give some ideas for what it could possibly be.
Awesome. So Shannon, I want to dive into kind of the meat of this episode. We're going to be talking about mistakes for folks to avoid when it comes to working remote. Like you said, it's a very hot topic. A lot of the folks that I'm talking to every day are, working remote or transitioning into working remote. And when we were talking through these before we hit record, you mentioned that the first mistake is that when you go remote, you somehow forget that you're still working with people. Can you elaborate on that idea for us?
Yeah. And I'll say just at the onset, working remote isn't for everybody, but it's for more people than you think. And a lot of people who are in these traditional work environments desire to work from home, but they're kind of afraid, well, what's the culture going to look like if my team is all dispersed in their homes? Or what are the working relationships going to transform into? Because we have such a great team. I would hate to lose that. But I would challenge that and say, even if you're working remote, you're still working with people and they still have lives that you need to invest in, even if you don't see each other every day. So for us at BELAY, it's creating a platform for those connections to be made, whether it's through Workplace, which is the Facebook application that we use for our internal corporate communication, or Zoom. I'll get into technology next, but just remembering you're working with real people who have lives outside of their jobs, just like you do. And it's okay to connect on that level too.
Love it. So the second one that you talked about, Shannon, you said just really being laxed in communication. Can you talk about kind of how do you do communication well in a remote environment?
Yeah, I think the underpinning of great communication when you're working remote is trust. And the faster you can expedite trust of your team, the more rapid the communication can happen. Because there's not this assumption of, well, I don't know what they're working on because they're just working from home. So you have to be intentional when you're working remote with communication. You do not have the luxury of just walking by somebody's office or running into them at the break room. Oh, I forgot to tell you about this project I was working on. You probably should know. Like, you just don't have that luxury when you're working remote.
Yeah.
So the things that virtual organizations need to do is really have a meeting cadence that makes sense for their organization. So for us, we do still get together face to face at least 4 times a year with our whole company, and then in between on Zoom, which is our video chat platform. And then our individual teams have a certain meeting cadence that they execute on a weekly, monthly basis. And one of the questions that we always encourage our teams to ask each other, and when I'm talking about our teams, I'm talking about the 60 people that we have on our corporate team in the Atlanta metro area. Yeah. The question is, who needs to know about this? Like, you can't just start working in a silo when you're working remote and forget that other people need to be looped in. And it's never been easier to do that than it is now with all the technologies that are available. One of the practical ways that we've done this at BELAY, our COO and CFO produce, and when I say produce, it is not a high production video, but create a video is probably a better way to put it, every other week. And it's called On the Horizon with TNLZ. And it's basically just them updating all of our corporate team on how we're doing. So for 2018, we have 4 defining objectives that have, criteria underneath them that the entire company is marching toward. And we feel like transparency is important, and we have to communicate to the team more than just once a quarter when we get together, how we're tracking toward all of those objectives. So those videos capture that, and then, other fun things that we have going on in the company. So you really do have to be intentional when you're working remote to communicate, like over communicate what's going on.
Yeah. And I think that us being a remote team as well, Shannon, I very much so resonate with that, because not communicating, I think in my head, I even kind of justify it by saying like, oh, well, I'm not micromanaging. And so to pride myself in, I'm not a micromanager, what it ends up manifesting is me just not communicating very much at all.
There's a fine line between micromanagement and then complete disconnection. Like, you try to strike this balance, especially if you lead like a growing organization where your role in like meetings and decision making evolves over time. And like for me as a CEO, like I used to be involved in all the meetings. Well, they don't need me in all the meetings anymore, but it doesn't mean that they don't need me as a leader. Yeah. And so it just looks different. It's more of a, how can I empower and help you and maybe break down any barriers that you're facing than me directing all of the meetings and decisions.
I love sharing growth stories, and I have a good one for you today. It's about a company called SentinelOne. This challenger cybersecurity brand was set out to disrupt the endpoint protection space. Their brand was top-notch, their product was innovative, but they were struggling to gain traction online in an already developed industry. Then they found Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency. Within the first quarter of working with Directive, SentinelOne was able to increase their organic traffic by 128% and overall lead volume by an outstanding 251%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview. This third mistake that you talk about, Shannon, is not leveraging technology. You alluded to this earlier, but obviously, it's a mistake that a lot of folks are making. How can they overcome this particular issue?
There's this sense, I think, like when we go around talking to other organizations who are trying to figure out this remote working thing and how not to sacrifice culture if you're working in a virtual capacity, that we must be full of a bunch of millennials who just grew up on technology and, FaceTime grandma and, just grew up that way. That is not the case. We do have, millennials on our team, but primarily we're not. And, before Brian and I started our company in 2010, I hardly ever used video chatting, but it's a way of working now. And I think that it's just kind of intimidating maybe to people who didn't grow up in this type of environment, myself included. But the bottom line is you kind of just have to get over it. Like if you're going to stay relevant as an organization and you're going to attract the kind of talent that you need, you have to embrace technology. And it does not have to be scary. You don't have to figure it all out at once, but find maybe a few systems that will give you the biggest bang for your buck in your organization. So, this is basic probably for your listeners, but we rely heavily on our CRM, which is Infusionsoft. I mentioned Zoom earlier. Basecamp and Slack are great ways to keep track of where things are. And I think we shouldn't, as leaders, we shouldn't assume that our teams are using technology that we don't embrace ourselves.
Yeah.
And we have to really lead the way in that, even if it can be intimidating at first.
One question I have for you, Shannon, specifically around Slack, because that's a tool that we've tried implementing on our team. And I found that it created a lot more noise. And I found myself constantly being pulled away by the constant like dings of, oh, there's another message, there's another message, there's another message. Is there a particular system that you guys have implemented as far as like the structure that you set up Slack within so that it's actually helpful and not just a constant distraction throughout the day?
Oh my God. I cannot believe that you honed in on Slack. That's like the one application I don't use. So I'm like a super big hypocrite right now. But honestly, there is a group within our organization. They are our client relations team that uses it heavily. And they are the ones that sort of oversee the relationship between the client and the bookkeeper, or the client and the executive assistant. And I think a lot of what they use it for is, I've come across this client situation. Has anybody else experienced it? Or this is something I'm seeing with a handful of my clients, just be on the lookout kind of thing. And so I can't really speak to the mechanics of how it works because I don't personally use it. It's not 100% deployed across our company, but I know that group in particular uses it a lot.
Got it. And I think there's even something there that, having specific use cases for kind of how you use certain tools, I would imagine would be incredibly beneficial. If you're saying, hey, this is what we're going to use, like, because we use Trello a lot just because of the way, like it's workflow management. And so each card is a representative of a particular episode that we're producing for a client. And so we can keep all of our communication in Trello because it's all like project specific. Like, hey, we need to go back and forth with our audio engineer about this particular episode. So we just jump into that card in Trello. And that's how we use Trello. And because it's not a, hey, we're asking each other what we're doing at, this Tuesday night or whatever, what's our post work plans? Like that's not the place where we use Trello. And because of that, we've had good success with that being a communications platform. Whereas I feel like Slack, if you don't communicate kind of, hey, these are almost the ground rules, if you will, it can get out of hand really quick. At least in my experience with it. So
that makes perfect sense. I think the thing that we've done with Workplace, are you familiar with that one?
I've heard of it. I haven't used it yet though.
It's like Facebook. So for a long time in our company, we use closed Facebook pages to have, just like for our corporate team, or we still have it for our contractors because it's a common platform for them. But what we found is that our team was having to be on Facebook like way too much. And so for the company, we decided just to split it out and go with Workplace. So we've segmented that into 4 different categories. We have our Friday high-lows. So every Friday back to you're still working with people, the team will post a high and a low of their week. And it can be high, I just landed the largest client yet, or low, my mom's really sick and in the hospital. Can you keep her in your thoughts and prayers? So it's a mix. And then we have a wellness program that's one of the channels on there, and then just general announcements and general Belay information. So we celebrate like anniversaries and birthdays and things like that there too.
This goes a little bit off of the kind of mistakes to avoid track, Shannon, but I'm just curious, those, the Friday high-low piece makes me think about, like, you guys have clearly done something right when it comes to establishing a culture, even, of having a remote team. Are there some other specific things that you guys have done from a cultural standpoint that you look back on and go, man, that was, I'm really glad we implemented that?
Oh my gosh. Listen, Brian and I came from very toxic work environments before we started Belay, and we're like, never again will we work for a company that we hate to work for. So having an amazing culture has always been like first and foremost for us. And we feel like to the extent our team is healthy and happy, so will our customers be.
Yeah.
So we put a lot of emphasis on developing an amazing culture. We identified our mission and values like a lot of organizations do. But we didn't want those to just be things that remained stagnant. We have them as an active part of our vernacular, and we share stories around them and really want, our values to be living and breathing. I think that's one thing. We have a high degree of accountability in our company. We're very results driven. And I think that has contributed to our culture because we get stuff done, and everybody knows that we're a high performing team. And so people who maybe don't fit within that culture, that nature, they just kind of orbit themselves out, or we let them go quickly because we don't have time for it. And we know the toxicity that can create in an organization. And I would say the last thing that we implemented pretty early on that I think has been a saving grace for us is we don't gossip. It is in our employee handbook. If you gossip, you're fired. And we've proven that to be true. And so for us, gossip means taking a problem to somebody that can't do anything about it. And we've just, you probably have had work experiences like this too, where somebody just complains about the company or the customers, the contractors or whatever to people who were otherwise having a great day. And now their day is messed up because you're putting that toxicity on them. And we just, we feel like the work that we're up to is too important to have time for that. And, a lot of people that come to work for the team, they know that as part of the interview process. And we've been clear, like, if this is something that you welcome into your life, this is not the place for you.
Shannon, this has been incredibly helpful, obviously, for me being the leader of a remote team. And I'm sure all the folks listening to this have had their ears perked the entire time. You've shared a wealth of wisdom with us. If there's somebody listening, they want to stay connected with you, they want to learn more about Belay, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Yep. A few different channels. belaysolutions.com is our website address. We're on Instagram at belay_solutions. And you can find me at Shannon K. Miles. I don't know who that Shannon Miles is, but I am the Shannon K. Miles.
I love it.
So I'm going to get her someday. She's the evil twin running up there somewhere.
Awesome, Shannon. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been fantastic, and I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, James.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.